secret sauce of life. Learn who you are and become it. This is my mantra that I repeat over and over again. Learn who you are and become it. And each day that might mean a new thing. Who am I? Wow, who am I today? And then how can I become that? How can you turn that into being? And that is like our job. That's like our contract, our soul contract. Learn who you are and become it.
Hello, my name is Taylor and I live in Beaufort, South Carolina. I enjoy drinking my mud water in the morning with MCT oil and coconut oil. I've never been a coffee drinker. I actually started drinking mud for the health benefits. About 1.5 years ago, I got COVID and it permanently damaged my vocal folds. I have seen an improvement physically from mud water, but more so, mud water has really helped me spiritually and mentally cope with the loss of my voice. The podcasts, the newsletters, the breathwork have all been really beneficial to me in accepting this new form of myself and understanding the greater purpose of the universe. So I just want to say thank you, Mudwater, for being more than just a drink.
Hey, Taylor, thanks for sending that in. Appreciate you being honest and open, talking about some real shit, and it seems to be a theme in the voice memos that we're getting here, which I appreciate. It's surprisingly rare to have a space where people feel comfortable to share publicly some shit that's vulnerable. I think that it does help make other people less lonely. I went to Burning Man for many years, and there's a spot there called the Temple where it is, I don't know if this is the correct definition, but it's a place where a lot of people grieve. People write letters to loved ones who have passed, and then the night after the burn, they burn the temple, and it's 60,000 people around this structure fire, and everyone is silent. And I think that it's something to behold when a culture has a place to grieve, when a culture has a place to feel safe sitting in that emotion. And I think we need more of it, and we can have our own little temple burns every time we talk about our vulnerability. I think it connects us as humans, because so much of the human experience is moving through hard things. So let's each of us have more temple burns, shall we? And people can send voice memos on anything they like. Just bust out your phone, record about 1 minute of audio, and send it to podcast@mudwtr.com, and we'd love to play it. Just let us know who you are, where you're listening from, something that's going on in your life right now, and if we play it on the podcast, we'll send you a free 30-serving tin of mud. My name is Kyle Tierman. Welcome to Trends with Benefits. I work as the head of editorial at Mudwater, and get to do this podcast, which is just so much fun for me. I've been neck deep in prepping for our new rest campaign. For those of you who don't know, Mudwater is coming out with a caffeine-free blend, which is meant to be drank at sunset during your evening ritual. Because, as the tagline goes, very clever tagline, made by Shane, our founder. God damn, he's clever. The best morning ritual starts the night before. So Rest will be coming out in mid-October. It's made with valerian root, rooibos, turkey tail, and it's something to give you a little calm and ease before you go to bed, so keep looking out for that. But for now, I would like to welcome Chris Keener, who is the head of Mud Films, but not only that, he is just a very deep thinker, funny guy, and this podcast was fucking awesome. So here's his bio, and we're going to get going. Sorry for the plane flying overhead. It's like a goddamn war zone going on in Venice here. Chris Keener heads up the burgeoning film and video mouthpiece with Mudwater, known as Mud Films. As founder and principal of 2 production companies, Goldenbear and Goodfight Media, he oversaw content for outlets like National Geographic, Discovery Channel, ESPN, and the Travel Channel. Recently, he directed and executive produced the 5-part docuseries We Speak Dance, which is on Netflix, and helmed an episode of the Webby Award-winning Conflict. It's called Conflict for Netflix and The Atlantic. As the creator of Goldenair Breathwork and Lixir app, that's Lixir app, Chris facilitates transformative experiences by connecting people to the power of their breath. He conducts workshops for clients like Salesforce, Soho House, Alo Yoga, and Penn University, while also working in prisons and with the underserved. He co-created and voiced the Lixir app, the first to focus on long-format guided breathwork. In this episode, we just jammed, man. We just jammed, and it was so much fun. So please welcome to the Trends with Benefits podcast, Chris Keener.
Nice little reset.
Leading us in with the breath work. I should do that more. Yeah, so often I'll start a podcast and I'll be anxious for the first 10 minutes and it'll take me that time to settle in.
Yeah.
And I could expedite the process just by doing a few deep breaths.
Yes, but don't shit all over yourself.
Don't shit all over yourself.
Don't shit all over
Don't
yourself.
should. Oh,
That's a Tony Robbins.
oh, that's good. That sounds like a Tony Robbins. Yeah, I wake up. I do cold plunges. I just let gratitude seep all over my body, and then I bring it out into the world. Don't shit all over yourself. You can be better.
Push it out. I feel like there should be a movie where Tony Robbins is like plays the role of a underworld being. You know what I mean? Like get him in some prosthetics, and I feel like it'd be pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Villain.
Like make him as an orc in Lord of the Rings. Like I see like some big eyebrows on him. Or did you ever see The Lost Boys?
Yeah.
With Kiefer Sutherland, where they turn into vampires and their foreheads get all crunched down.
Yeah. I'm thinking like a Ron Perlman, like Hellboy character.
Yeah.
But he's good. He's the force that creates transition in the world.
Yeah. Look deeper, and there is good beneath the evil.
Yeah.
Those are always the most interesting superhero movies, when the villain you kind of identify with the villain.
Absolutely. A movie's only as good as its villain, for sure. And the protagonist is only as good as the force they oppose. So you need a strong any movie worth its salt has a memorable villain.
Oh, that's interesting. It's almost a paradox though, because the good guy needs the bad guy, but the bad guy needs to be not just a bad guy.
Yeah. And in the best movies, the bad guy will also have a transformation of some kind. Okay. Which they're not a steady object of evil. That's not really interesting. It's not really that relatable.
Right.
Even Thanos in the Avenger movies is like this very complicated, interesting being who has a point of view that you're like, wow, that's almost something I would think about.
Right.
And he's like, so it's
Well, I've read in the classic hero's journey story, you know the true protagonist because they're the ones that goes through the transformation. But more recently, I've started to see more narratives like Game of Thrones, where it seems like every main character in it goes through their own transformation. And it's like, it would be so difficult in that writer's room to try and hold all of those narrative arcs at the same time, but they make it work, and it's so captivating.
Yeah, for sure. It's just more relatable. I mean, the more you sense that people are going through it, the more you're going to latch on to these characters. And it's troubling when you find that you're identifying with the villain, and that stirs you up a little bit. And you're
Right. Well, I think that our culture also yearns for it right now in some ways more than ever, because mainstream media lacks so much nuance. We try and make the villains out to be uncomplicated people. And we don't let people have their pasts. And I think that that's a very human truth that we all kind of want to understand, which is why maybe we gravitate towards that.
Amen.
I thought that The Joker was an exceptional movie.
Yeah. I mean, that's just unpacking the mindset of a villain. I find that movie also, and any movie that does that, to be really further in advancement of humanity generally, because anytime I come across someone, or at least I try to have the mantra when I come across someone that's inexplicably nasty to me, or just has something, they say that in Japan, when someone crosses the street in front of the car, the general perception of the driver, like say someone runs across the street in front of you, the general perception of the driver is, oh, that person must be in a hurry. Whereas in the US, our general perception is that person is an asshole.
Right.
And so there's a generosity of the collective, which extends to someone, the empathy that says, I imagine that they have something that made them this way.
Right.
It's situational as opposed to inherent.
Yeah, there was, I heard once on some long forgotten podcast about this thought experiment you can do where you see someone driving in a car and you have the thought, oh, that person's an asshole. And then you take that thought back to, how can I be sure that can I be sure, the inarguable truth? Can I be sure that they are an asshole? And you start like winding that thought back to all the things that they could be.
Are they a
needing to get
Eagles
to?
Fan?
Yeah, exactly.
Put evidence in each column. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's a great thing too. Evidence, like, is this really true, or is this my story? It's a good approach to generally how you're seeing life, Yeah.
Well, I catch myself so often making statements that are opinions rather than truths, and I can, like, when you start to notice it and delineate between those two forms of speaking, it's really interesting to start to take a closer look at the sentences coming out of your mouth.
Yeah.
I just, and you always know when it starts with, I just feel like.
Yeah. I just feel like. I don't know. I just kind of feel like. Yeah. Well, we spout a lot of opinions.
We sure do.
I sure do.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that The Joker was a great portrait of mental health in America. Mm-hmm. I know that that's not an original idea. A lot of people are, have kind of had that idea, but like we so often otherize people with mental health issues. To be able to have the protagonist in that story kind of like go through this dark transformation through a society that didn't have the space to kind of hold those mental health challenges and to kind of see what can happen. I felt like that one struck a chord with modern society. Yeah.
I mean, I heard a podcast you did where you mentioned just having an interaction. This might've been one of your newsletters, where just having interaction with the person on the street, where that was the highlight of their day, the highlight of their week, that they might, that you might turn to engage them instead of walking by. And that choice we make all the time is like, is this my responsibility? Is this part of social life, something that I'm going to engage and spend my time doing with kind of some awkwardness inherent in it? Like, to engage a person that you might not normally, or someone with mental health who clearly is showing up as, maybe this person's, not operating at the same frequency I am, but am I willing to engage and see where this could go? And it might be awkward, and I might actually be asked to help, or to engage even further. That's a responsibility we all have, to engage that question, certainly, and then ideally we get involved to some degree. Right. Yeah, but we live in Venice, so this is there's a huge mental health problem a block away. Yeah. And a huge, substance abuse problem, and a huge homeless problem, and it's all available to engage or to walk by. Right. I was I was reading that book Tribe by Sebastian Junger. Great book, super short book too. I gotta give my tip my hat to a guy who
who consolidated such a big idea into such a short book to share it widely. And there's this line in it where he's talking about how littering is one of the ultimate forms of a fractured society, because it's sort of this representation, an illustration that you are not part of this greater system, that you are this kind of atomized being and what you do doesn't matter. And I think that, you know, rather than the opposite, which is like, hey, I'm going to go around and I'm going to pick up a few pieces of trash. It's a small act in and of itself, but I think that energetically that it represents something so much larger. And like, I believe that society is we're on this kind of fragile teeter-totter really between like communication and violence and like chaos and stability, and like the scope of the human experience is so vast. We really do, like, I do believe that we have the opportunity to live in, you know, a hell or a utopia depending on what we collectively create. And I also really identify with that idea of, you know, you know, what is it? These small acts of kindness that do change the world over time.
Oh man, there's so many examples of that. You know, there's, you know, social media. Are we putting out our trash? Are we just kind of dumping something there that's people somehow? You're thousands of people, you're thousands of followers, you're on a stage. And are you just putting something there that they can look at? And it's just, I don't want to deal with it. Like I did this thing and you check it out and
right,
you deal with it. Right.
Yeah.
Or are you giving a gift or some generous, you know, thing to the public space that's valuable to anyone else? It's okay to you know, need to be borne witness to. I'm going to share my life. I think that's fine. But an awareness that is a public space. And then to extend that to, I think there's a really funny way of showing this too, which is I was in Italy and I was just noticing how everyone was so well kept and well dressed. And I remember, you know, growing up, I was kind of dressed modestly. My father was a modest guy and didn't really dress up. And then I started like dressing a little better and just started like paying attention to fashion a little more, and just like, and he wants, you know, I got in a discussion with him about it. He's wearing sweatpants out with a flannel shirt tucked into the sweatpants, you know, and I just kind of, it all hit me why it was important to me to dress well. It was that thing that I saw in Italy, which is that when people dress well, you get that they're contributing to the public space. Like I'm going to show up in the public space. I'm going to dignify myself as a way to dignify the general community by looking half decent when I leave my house. And that's not to say, you know, you have to do it any kind of way, but just an awareness.
That's so interesting.
And so these spaces, you go to, you know, the piazzas in Florence, right, and you're not going to dress in like an Eagles sweatshirt and you're going to dignify the space by showing.
What is your history with the Eagles, by the way? You mentioned these guys
I'm from
twice.
Philly, and I just met a guy last night who's from Philly. We were just talking about Philly, and it's just hilarious. I don't know. In my head, that's like an inflection point. It's like, am I going to wear Eagles clothes for the rest of my life, or am I going to change my whole outlook?
That's so
and fly, so to speak.
Will I transcend
the Eagles would want me to do?
The Eagles would want me to fly.
Yeah, exactly.
They'd want me to transcend the team.
Go birds. Go me. I'm a bird. I should write an Eagles themed self-help book.
Yeah, an Eagles bit about like it's like a comedic Goodwill Hunting guy trying to get out of his Eagles fan base.
Yeah, I've seen it happen.
The Eagles want me to fly.
Do it for the birds.
Yeah, well, I'd never thought about dressing well as a way to contribute to the public space. It's but I do try and put on nicer clothes when I'm feeling down.
There you go.
It really does change a lot.
That's great.
Yep.
That's great. There's another thing I want to say about your, littering, right?
Right.
I see that too. And it's almost unfathomable, like to see someone take something and just throw it out of their car. Like I saw a guy a couple years ago, I saw a guy dump a full big gulp on the side of the street. And I went over, I got out of my car, and he was driving, he's dropped it out the side of his window, and I picked it up and I gave it to him. I said, I think you forgot this. And he took it. The interesting thing is he took it and he kind of contritely, like, he realized, I think sometimes we have to call each other out.
Right.
We can't let people get away with stuff like that. We have to show them the social rules by example, but also sometimes by, stepping in, being a little uncomfortable, especially if you're in a position to do so.
Right.
I'm a big guy, that affords me a lot of physical, ability to do such a thing. But
yeah, I think that the point you just touched on is profound, because we spend so much of our lives avoiding conflict, which creates further conflict down the road. And we culturally tend to see conflict as a negative thing, even though we're addicted to it in storytelling. And we're fraught with conflict everywhere. But to just be like, yo, hey, you forgot this.
Yeah.
I think it forces people to look at their actions more actively. There's a great book called The Power of Habit by James Clear. Have you read that?
Yeah.
So there's a section in it where he talks about how when pilots are taking off from the runway, they need to speak aloud what they're doing as they're doing it. So they need to say, okay, putting the key into the ignition.
I love it. I want to hear you go.
Yeah, you want to. I just realized I'm like, oh no. Because in a podcast, you're thinking about what you're saying, and then you're kind of also thinking about where it's going, and you're like, oh shit,
this plane's not going to leave the ground.
So you put your foot on the gas pedal, and you start turning the steering wheel, and then I think you put the sail up, and then you
definitely the flange. Something happens with the flange.
Yes, pipe. I think that there's something about a boat. Yes, there's a rudder. I feel a rudder going, but they're forced to say, okay, turning the rudder to the left right now. Cockpit at full speed, Johnson. But in doing so, they reduce the amount of mistakes that they make because they're forced to take an active role in what they're doing. Like, have you ever thought like, I don't really want sweets right now, as you're reaching for the chocolate? It's almost like your brain has this schism in it where you're thinking like, I don't really want to be doing this right now, but my body is moving towards the chocolate right now, right? And booze is one for me. Like all the time, like I don't want to drink, and like, as you're cracking it, right? Or I'm like, yeah, I'm fucking done for a month, and then Chris is like, hey, we're going to a party tonight. I'm like, I'm there.
So what's the prescription? Do you say it out loud? I don't want the booze.
I do not want the booze. Or no, what you say is, I am having a beer right now, because it forces you to get your mind in full alignment with the action that you're taking. And I think that by you like calling the guy out with the big gulp, like he probably was not thinking, I'm going to litter right now, and this is going to impact someone else's day. It's going to make my neighborhood a dirtier place to live in. I think that a lot of the, like, what we attribute to nefariousness often is just negligence.
Yeah. Or, and it's easy to kind of avoidance too, to do those, if that pattern of thought comes up, or if your better angels speak into your ear that you probably shouldn't do that, we get used to tamping them down enough that you don't hear them anymore. And so to reinforce someone's better angels, you might say something.
Yeah. And to, I think, the idea of being more comfortable in conflict is something that's powerful to practice, because otherwise it creates this kind of pressure cooker situation for people who like don't practice that kind of like embodied power, like men or women. Like, I think that we aren't taught healthy conflict and conflict resolution.
I just thought of a way to do that.
Let's do it.
We were at the the Future Islands show.
Yeah.
It was an amazing concert.
dope.
Went to, first of all. And I turned at one point and just looked at the crowd, and just stood the other way, facing the other way and watching the crowd. And it's an amazing thing to do. If you're ever at a concert, I highly recommend turn around and just watch the faces of people. Enjoy that. It's really good for, to take that in. People having an ecstatic experience. Very, very heartening. And but then I thought about the idea of turning in an elevator, which sometimes happens, like turning and facing people in an elevator, which is so terrifying to do, right? The whole idea that you might do that.
Right.
But I do that sometimes.
You do that.
And I'll turn to people and just strike up a conversation. I mean, it's weird times because tight quarters and, this isn't maybe the best time to do that. But in the before times,
and you're like 6'5".
Yeah, totally. But to see if you can just kind of just handle that, handle that confrontation of another human being, and
right. Yeah, you don't actually need to even engage linguistically with someone else. It's amazing how quickly you can get uncomfortable just by italicizing your day in one small way or another.
Yeah.
And it's actually a Stoic philosophy. There's a Stoic named Cato who would famously wear a purple tunic around town and be laughed at to strengthen the idea that he should only be embarrassed by things that he should truly be embarrassed by.
Yeah. And a contribution to the public space, I would say too, in terms of wearing things that are interesting or colorful or delightful, that they can kind of, again, contribute another color to the palette of life. Like there's nothing better than someone who expresses themselves fully all the time. This is like secret sauce of life. Learn who you are and become it. This is my mantra that I repeat over and over again. Learn who you are and become it. And each day that might mean a new thing. Who am I? Wow, who am I today? And then how can I become that? How can you turn that into being? And that is like our job. That's like our contract, our soul contract. Learn who you are and become it, because there's no one else who's going to do that. There's no one else that has your bones and your blood and your specific history and all those things. So the idea of aspiring to be another in some ways is kind of the opposite of that. It's kind of the worst thing we can do.
Right.
Certainly to learn from others and to model people is fine, but you are the infinite possibility that can come from Kyle being Kyle is like, let's not get in the way of that.
Right.
What would it take to draw out more of that?
That's damn good.
Yeah. And I think conflict's part of it. I think putting yourself up at,
right,
a little bit of striking fear in your own heart. So you see, how does Kyle handle this situation when I turn and face the other people in the elevator with a mirthful, disposition and body language that says I'm open and generous, and see what happens.
Well, dude, I think that the power of a morning routine really speaks to that, because it kind of centers you. Like just to give yourself even 10 minutes of like meditation or breath work in the morning, it is in many ways, it's not a selfish act, because you are kind of remembering who you are so that you can engage with the world as more of you. Yeah. And if you don't have that little, like for me, it's like, it changes day to day. If I just get up and rush out the door, it feels like I'm just being, flailing about, like being blown with the wind, just avoiding conflict and chasing pleasure. Yeah. But to like be able to have that little time, it feels very samurai to me.
Oh yeah. You're sharpening your Kyle.
Right? Oh, that's good. I love that.
The Kyle is gleaming and ready to cut through the world. Yeah. Or play Aikido. I love that. I love the metaphor too of this is not mine. The Aikido, one of these martial dispositions where you are parrying energy. You're moving. So if someone comes and attacks you, you're using that energy of that person coming towards you, and you're parrying it, and they fall on the ground. And
right.
You've done little, but just push the energy aside. And like, that's not mine. That's not Chris. Whatever energy that is coming at me, if I know where I am and I feel grounded, I can just step aside and let the things that don't belong in my life, let them go by. I don't have to engage all of them. I don't have to confront all of them. And if I do, it's recognizing that's your deal. That's like if someone comes at you and they're, just being a flailing asshole, it's like you can leave that. That's yours. I don't, that's no part of mine. And so I set that aside and I keep moving with my own energy and feel very untouched, unperturbed.
Right.
This is the middle way. This is the non-attachment.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it all started making. No, it's good, man. I'm down to go down this road. This is dope. A lot of that started making more sense to me when I started taking psychedelics and starting to recognize the limitations of my view of myself as this atomized being, and to also, like, if you've ever had a dark trip, like, you realize that there's some energies that you don't want to engage with, and they become very pronounced if you put yourself in a situation where you're on a big bag of mushrooms at a weird festival. And to be able to further strengthen like your Chris as you are going through it's just another way of seeing the world that I think is often overlooked, but largely guiding us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that you mentioned the parts of you that there's this self-transcendent experience that also often happens in the psychedelic experience, also in the breathwork experience. This is why I love breathwork, is you kind of de-atomize yourself, as you say, your ideas about who you are, we cling to them. And breathwork's a great example, because the way that I like to guide breathwork in the typical sort of ceremonies that we do are about half hour of heavy breathing. You've done a few now, and they typically what happens is as you begin the breathing pattern, this is a very activating pattern. So you're breathing in twice, out once, all through the mouth. That pattern of breathing, for a myriad of reasons, causes all sorts of wonderful things to happen in your body and in your mind. And so you start off by the chatterbox of your mind, and often people find it very challenging right out of the gate. This breathing pattern is difficult. Your mind's in it. You're thinking about it. You're like, I don't want to do this. Oh my God, I got work to do. I got to get back to my email, blah, 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 blah. Chatterbox, the monkey mind, all that stuff is just going. And then around, it's like 8 to 12 minutes in, depending. Sometimes it's earlier. It's almost never after that. All that starts to turn into this cloudy, fuzzy thing. And then before you know it, your version of who you are, yourself, is in some ways transcended or kind of dissipates. And you find yourself in a new version of, what is this soup that I'm in here? What's going on here now? And I know that I know Chris is still here, but there's other availability. There's an expanded sense of self here. There's something else available. This isn't everybody's experience, but this is certainly a very common one. And within that reshuffling, there is access to new definitions too. Like, I used to see Chris as somebody who's really like self-limiting and had issues with an ex-girlfriend or whatever. And now all of a sudden you slow your breathing, you come back and into a nice gentle meditation at the end, and you're like, I don't know what just happened. It's almost like the waters rise and then reshuffle and then lower again, and these canals that they settle into are different than the ones that you began with. So you've created new patterns of self. And I think the psychedelic experience for a lot of people is just like an expanded availability of who you are. And that can be incredibly encouraging when you've been stuck in the same vision of who you may be that feels limited or feels like stuck in the past or whatever. So it's a monumentally encouraging experience to realize that the Chris or the Kyle, the self that you believed yourself to be, may be flexible, may be changeable, may be mutable. You may be the captain of your soul after all, and you may be willing to sail into new waters and discover new capabilities. All that becomes possible. It's like a lens shift.
It's interesting that you used the word definition, because I think that I'm a words guy. As you know, love my words.
Yeah.
Love my words.
Yeah, your little
Got my little flashcards with me.
Yep.
Got my flashcards with me.
Yeah.
And I think that the words that we use on ourselves are very powerful. And often we are using these words without speaking them aloud. And it is that kind of passive thinking, whereas like, oh, it's like stupid or, unlovable or like, lonely or what, then it's almost like they just flash in and out of our minds without us actually taking a good look at that flashcard and seeing if we identify with it. And it's almost like breathwork gives you this new set of flashcards that you can start building an identity off of with new words.
Yeah. And some of those words are a bit more ineffable, I find, like expansive or like limitless or generous or, kind. That's what's so encouraging to me about that work. The breath work, the psychedelic experiences, the self-transcendent experiences all the time. I mean, I've seen thousands of people come through these breathwork experiences, and I can count on one hand the number of people that had what you might call a negative experience. And in all of those situations, without exception, through processing or at least they put someone back in something that needed attention in their life. So maybe it was very challenging, but it was something from their past that really needed attention, that was not healed, and that can be very difficult for people. That can be very challenging. And indeed, that's something you might, want to get help with. You might need work through, like a PTSD situation or something, or a sexual trauma or those kinds of things. And what I find so encouraging is that when we dip into that soup, that larger expansion of self, whatever that other state is that we go to, we come back encouraged. We come back feeling like, I'm not such a bad person. Life isn't full of rules and boundaries and definitions everywhere I go, where I'm failing all the tests and I'm limited by words that suck. And it's actually like people come back and say, man, I really I had a vision of myself that I liked, or I saw healing with a family member that I thought there was beef still there, and you can clear the beef.
Right.
Because you realize how much of it is in your own definition of what, limits of life.
So would you say that most people find a renewed sense of compassion? For sure.
And self-compassion would be the leading, domino to fall.
Huh. What do you think it is that makes that insight so common?
I think it's our breath. I think it's a very, our breath is this wonderful metaphor for the expansion and contraction of the universe, the cycle, the waves of life, the coming and going, the birth and death. It's all in there in the inhale and the exhale. And it's so much in there that that we've named things after it all along, the word spirit, meaning breath. Respirare. So we breathe in, we breathe out. Expirare. So we breathe out, we get rid of, we expire, we move on. And so this idea of we have this process of living, of pulling in life stuff, the spirit, the stuff of life, and that's in every language. That's the pneuma of Greek, that's the chi, that's the prana, the life force. Pulling it in with every inhale. We're welcoming life. We're saying yes to it with every inhale. And with every exhale, we're getting rid of that stuff that no longer serves us. I mean, that's CO2, and there's, and water in the bodily process, and there's very chemical things that are going on in your body as you bring in oxygen, make energy, and release what no longer serves you, the CO2. But there's a very real, I believe, thing that when we breathe well, we are living well, because we're accepting the process of life, which is ephemeral. And we're always dying a little bit, and we're always being born a little bit. And when you give yourself to that process, having never breathed the breath of the past or breath of the future, you're breathing this one now, and you're accepting life as it is right now, and you're saying yes to it. And what is compassion but an agreement with whatever may be right in this moment. To be compassionate is to surrender to that, is to surrender to it with others when we see them going through something, and we allow them the compassion, the presence of saying, I'm here with you. I'm with you as this thing happens, and I'm open to the mystery of what this may bring. And it's compassion with ourselves when it's saying, I don't need to define what I'm supposed to do next. I don't need to put shackles on what has happened before me, but I'm with me right now and I'm okay. And so this self-compassion that comes from the very act of taking a dignified breath, of breathing well, of saying yes, welcome, and goodbye, no thank you, or yes, born again, goodbye, death, I accept that I'm headed out eventually. So when you then ceremonialize that, or when you pay attention to it, you realize that in these acts of ecstatic breathing in our life, which are many. You think about working out at the gym. If you're going for it on the treadmill, what's happening with your breath? Your breath is moving. When you're surfing, right? When you're charging out, like ecstatic things are happening in your breath. And these are the things we love, right? When you're dancing around a fire, when you're beating on a drum, when you're these ecstatic human experiences all have in common that our breath is moving in a way that is very invigorating. And so when we channel that ceremonially, when we engage in breath work, or we work with our breath, we have the ability to kind of reverse engineer that ecstatic experience and be really present in life and find that those moments of true deep compassion and presence.
Yeah, I think that surfing big waves is largely an experience of breath control.
Tell me more.
Oh, I think that a predominant feeling out there in waves that are scary is trying to take control of your breath in a situation where it's trying to get away from you again and again. I find that that's a really consistent, that is like on the most specific and micro level, the challenge that you're up against again and again and again out surfing, big scary waves. And I find that doing some breath work on the beach before going out and then breathing through my nose when I'm in the lineup to try and keep my heart rate as low as possible are two very consistent practices that allow me to kind of derive the most joy out of those experiences and really like the most I don't know, I hadn't thought about how it very much comes back to the breath.
So this is something as a breathwork guide that I hear all the time. And I was talking to my cousin who's a professional tennis player.
Right.
And I asked him, what's the thing that, not fishing. I said, what is the thing that, you find to be the best, the thing that you teach people all the time about tennis?
Right.
Like, what is the number one? And he had this like, aha. And he's like, I teach them how to breathe.
Right.
And then I've heard that from athletes in many genres, and it's true. It really does come back to your breath and breath control. I think we're learning a lot more about that now as a society. We're hearing a lot more of research come back about the breath, and I think that what you're saying about calming your breath or placing yourself in a position of readiness. That's very much the I spoke a little bit about ecstatic forms of breath work, but there's also the daily breath work that I do as you is very calming, is very much a breath work to set yourself up for a world of unknowns.
Right.
This idea that you can control what you can because the world's coming at you, and in surfing certainly that's the case. By the way, I've seen you, like I'm picturing you dropping in. We went out at sunset on like double overhead day. I was peeing my board shorts, and Kyle's there. I look over, Kyle's like got this bonsai face on him, dropping into some massive tube. It was just amazing watching you surf, man.
Oh, thanks. It's just interesting. I think how much of like any intense situation, really, whether it's like a comedian going on stage or someone jumping out of a plane skydiving or a tennis or someone playing tennis in a big match, like I do think that often the differentiator is breath control, which gives way to presence, which allows you to perform at your peak in that moment.
Yeah, that is definitely the chain of command.
Right.
Yeah.
So you've kind of you have a very storied life, and it goes, from filmmaking to breath work, and it's taken you all around the world. Did filmmaking come first, and what's like the timeline of how these two seemingly disconnected career paths converged?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that the idea that I would become a breathwork guide, first of all, what the hell is that? That wasn't certainly a thing. I mean, a yoga teacher, someone who teaches pranayama certainly is, but the specific categorization of breathwork guide was not around, when I was coming up in Philly. But we were making movies all the time, so I've always been a guy who would make movies with my buddies and stuff, and then started traveling young. To be honest, like the way that the breath work comes in, filmmaking is all about storytelling, right? And so, and I think a big part of being an artist or filmmaker is having life experience that you want to, share or talk about. And so I definitely got on a binge of life experience,
right?
And trying to get as much of that as possible, traveling.
I once heard someone, I think Ryan Holiday, he does the Daily Stoic. He said the best way to become a great writer is to have an interesting life.
Yeah, that's great. It's certainly true with most of the filmmakers I know. But then I also had this, like, my mother is a hospice chaplain. And so I lost a sister early in life, and that colored my childhood very much. So there was this loss, this very heavy loss, and it informed, my whole family dynamic in that. But there was also, as part of that, this awareness, I think, of death, really, truly, that death was always nearby. And my mom found her way into the spiritual arts, leaving the Catholic Church behind because they didn't really support her when she was going through the divorce from my father, which happened as a result of the child loss.
Oh, wow.
So there was this whole, all that is to say, this big pile of loss, and processing it led my mom to this sort of new age spiritual path. And as a result of that, I was in, breathing in sweat lodges when I was 14 years old, and kind of going on this other alt spiritual path with her, and learning a bit about that.
How old are you when your sister passed?
I was 2.
Oh, wow.
I was a little guy. Yeah. But it's interesting to think about that, because here I was 2 years old, the center of the world, right? That everything's about you when you're 2, as it should be. You can't really see outside of yourself. And all of a sudden, everyone around me is sad.
Right.
And so clearly that's my fault.
Right.
So this becomes my central journey, is to unpack that, throughout my life. I need to please everyone, and hopefully everyone's okay. And so the shadow of that is, really being down on myself if anyone in the room's not happy. And I think the genius of that is being able to guide people or extend myself empathetically to a group of people. And so that's where the breath work really comes in. It's all these life stories, they all tie together. So
sure. I mean, especially that early on when your brain's developing all its very new neural pathways. Like, so often that is the more science that comes out, it's like, it's what happened 1 to 5.
Yeah.
Right. And what trajectory did that set you on? And as you say, there's 2 sides to every coin, right? So there is maybe the difficulty of wanting to be a people pleaser, but then there is also the genius of empathy that can come from that experience. So it's cool that you've articulated that.
Yeah, I think it took a while for it all to crystallize into whatever form it is now, and I'm sure it'll change. But when I look back, it's interesting to think about these themes that were always there. So I was making films, but for instance, I went to Guatemala. And I went and worked in a Christian orphanage for about 6 months. And that's where I learned Spanish and kind of, got thrown into the mix in this Christian orphanage. There's a friend of mine's dad who ran this orphanage. And I went down there not as a Christian, but open-minded to whatever was happening there. And what I found was this beautiful extension of people going there to help where no one else was. So these Christian missionaries were providing very basic sustenance for kids who were, coming from very hard situations on the streets of Guatemala City, and taking them and giving them food, giving them, really a path to life. And the contingency of that was that they would be sort of baked in the Christian church, and that they would be steeped in Christianity the whole time. And there was no this without that. So they couldn't stay there if they didn't remain Christian. So this was something that kind of rubbed me, and I thought, this doesn't feel right holistically to be here, but I see that there's help being done, but there's no like real empathy in the way that these missionaries are extending themselves into the lives of these children. They're just placing their kind of beliefs over the kids, and it became super problematic to the degree that I ended up making a film about it. So I went back 10 years later with 16 people and made a film about a missionary who goes to Guatemala, and while he's there sort of goes down, and he's going down to language school in the city every day, and walks into this dark bar and meets these other Guatemalan people that are very intriguing, and ends up kind of leaving his missionary behind and going off into the hills. And so this has been kind of a theme in my life of like the spiritual path overlapping with the creative path, and then how can that be expressed in a way that's inclusive and feels like there's not just one group that gets it. And breathwork, I think, is the ultimate culmination of that, because I feel like I can speak to anyone. You can bring anyone into a breathwork class, and what they really experience is a vision of themselves. Like they really get to go in and explore themselves. There's no prerequisite for that. There's no boundaries to that. It's just, it's a doing. It's not a thinking. It's not a believing. It's a doing. You breathe in this certain way. You have an experience. And what pops out the other side is fantastically interesting. So long way of saying my artistic, like my creative career and this like spiritual yearning for inclusivity, I think have always been the two driving forces.
Right. Have you always been drawn to stories with paradox?
I think so. Yeah, because it's funny.
Yeah.
Like to me, it's funny when people are, their own worst enemy, or when life is, that paradox of these people that were
there to help,
yeah,
but also
so problematic in some other way. Totally.
Quid pro quo, or yeah. I think that paradox is so fascinating and it's just such an honest depiction of so much of the world.
In emptiness, we find fullness. I mean, there's a paradox that happens literally in the breathwork experience. So if you just take a huge deep breath, let's breathe, take a big deep breath. More. Exhale it all. And then we're just going to hold empty here for a minute. And in that emptiness, that empty place, all is possible. There's like this possibility that comes from emptiness from the beginning. And I think that in itself is a paradox. Like we go to the quiet place where all becomes full.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a powerful prism with which to see the world is through paradox. And I think that is where good storytelling starts to happen. And it's also where maturity and adulthood occur. I did a lot of environmental short films early on through my teens, and they were excruciatingly earnest, and and there was a lot of advocacy in them.
Yeah.
And I look back on them, through squinted eyes with a hand over my forehead, because I now see that I could have made the exact opposite film and it would also be true. For example, I did a doc about the GMO protests in Hawaii that were big in the media maybe 7 years ago or so, because every genetically engineered seed that is sold in America at one point or another touched the islands of Hawaii. It's the genetic engineering capital of the world, where they do a lot of the testing there, and a lot of that testing is GMOs largely exist, genetic engineering exists so that crops can withstand heavier amounts of pesticides, so that a company can spray the crop and then the insects die, but the crop does not die. And I was, this lefty kid from Santa Cruz who was, part of the surf world, which was very much opposed to GMOs. They're big and scary, and Monsanto is the devil. And I did a doc about explaining GMOs in a purely negative light, and interviewed Kelly Slater and Dustin Barca and these pro surfers that were very much against it. And I remember there was one comment after I released the film. There's always just one comment that gets you because it's fucking true.
Yeah.
And it said, Kyle Tierman makes GMO film, doesn't interview one farmer.
Oh.
And I was like,
gotcha.
Oh, gotcha. Fucking gotcha, right? Because there is the whole other story of farmers needing to use genetically engineered crops for more profit, or this dynamic between the farmers and the companies that's very interesting. And there's a whole other story there that I didn't even explore. And that's not to, I still think that the world needs more small organic farms. I do think that food diversity and food sovereignty is the solution. It's not about just continuing to condense the amount of companies that own more and more of the world's food. I think that's a recipe for disaster. But to not even explore a more nuanced view of the issue to me now feels very childish. And it was because I was, a child when I was doing it. Right? And the world gets so much more interesting when you start acknowledging paradox.
Complexity is hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to reckon with, to wrestle with.
I guess the question then becomes, how do you acknowledge complexity and explore that while not falling into moral relativism, which I think is a very dangerous concept, where you just, hey, the Muslim world wants to make sure that women can't have education, and we'll kill them if they don't want to wear hijabs. Like, who am I to judge? Right.
Yeah.
And I think that is an extremely scary path if you can't actually cast any form of moral judgment from, the macro to the micro of the guy throwing his big gulp out the side of the car.
Yeah.
Right. So squaring those two, I think, is a path that is also very interesting.
Yeah. I think that we've been given some guideposts in that regard, in the way that if we're sort of like clear vessels with ourselves, and we actually observe clearly what feels good and what doesn't. I think more often than not, what feels good is probably the way to navigate. And like, truly, does it feel good to throw that big gulp out the window? How does that feel? I mean, it might feel easy, but it doesn't feel fulfilling, I would think. So getting super clear in yourself and navigating through truly how you feel, I think, is one way to do that. And the other is like arguments, equal voice doesn't mean, if two people are having a discussion, the one who comes with more evidence should be weighted more.
Right.
Like both can have a spot at the podium, but also like we should be weighing evidence. It's not relative. It's actually like, yes, let's give full say to these discussions, and then let's actually weigh the evidence that's being brought to the table. So,
right, evidence and expertise,
yeah, as well, which probably factors into the evidence pile, right?
Right.
So it's like, evidenced by this man's 16 years at Stanford, or this woman's astronaut status.
Right. I remember I pretty recently after you and I first met, and I was talking about another person who works with us at MUD WTR, Elizabeth, and I was complimenting her veracity. She's very accurate and very fastidious with facts, and she works as our managing editor. And you're like, man, I fucking appreciate that so much.
She's amazing.
And I was like, I'm gonna like this guy. He has a respect for facts.
Yeah, we care a lot about facts.
Yeah,
which is interesting as a breathwork guide. It is a there's a lot of being in this kind of wellness sphere. I just said something. This is going to be a paradox too, right? I just said like navigate through your own feelings, but also fuck your feelings. Like
right.
also there's a world out there that must be factored in, and that we have to pay attention. We're not islands. We are, let me live in a house by the side of the road and be a friend to man. Let us care for each other. Let us not isolate and say my journey to self, discovery is only internal and only will be. That's nothing unless you, as Ram Dass says, spend a weekend with your family, like see how enlightened
right.
you are, right? So that is our job, is to constantly go within, to discover who we are and then become it. But the becoming it involves other people. It involves putting your opinions up against others and being wrong 49% of the time, probably.
Right.
That's a good ratio.
Right.
Maybe it's a lot more than that.
You've clearly developed a disposition that's very fun to talk to. Like having this podcast with you is such a blast because we're kind of exploring, it's a little bit like, hey, I know this, but so clearly don't know everything. And there's just this kind of like, wow, isn't that interesting? Like sort of orientation towards life that makes hanging with you really fun, because there's not.
The Philadelphia Eagles taught me that.
Right, I'm sure. Wow, we lost. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
what is there to learn from this experience?
Oh man.
Right.
Yeah.
It's cool. It's a great orientation to have. I mean, do you have this might be too obtuse of a question, but do you have a process when you're trying to work out some problem that you have in your life where you both are checking in with your feelings and you're also engaging the outside world, engaging evidence and expertise? Do you have some kind of process that you will move through? Because I often meet people who are on one side of that or the other. Like they love science so much they're kind of dogmatic about it and don't. Maybe that's not the best example, but they don't really check in with themselves. There's a kind of they've kind of hardened in their own feelings, and they're hyper analytical about the way that they're making decisions and moving through life. And then there are people who won't get out of bed if Mercury's in retrograde.
Yeah. So triangulate it. Is one thing that I think is fun. I was just talking to someone last night about this. I like triangulating things. So for instance, COVID is a great example. Where do I get my information? This is a freaking morass of information. Right. God, it's so hard to navigate. Where do I get good information from? I choose points of triangulation that I think are really, diverse and also trustworthy in my mind. One of whom on COVID is my sister, Colleen, who happens to work in a hospital in Brooklyn and has through all of COVID. And that's a good piece of information. She's seeing the front lines. She's a healthcare provider. To her opinion in my head, if I'm not factoring that in very, very, very highly, then I'm missing an opportunity to learn. And then I would also pick, I might pick as a COVID source, Dr. Fauci, the guy who's like the government head who's talking about COVID. And that's probably a good person to listen to. You might be critical or you might have criticism, but certainly in the triangle, like that's a good point for me. And then maybe a third one, just to like throw a monkey wrench.
It's like Kyle, because he's a surfer, you know, and it's like he surfs
right.
He surfs pretty well, you know, and it's like he should know about COVID. Am I right?
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
Maybe a third piece of information is like, you know, someone in the wellness sector who's very much decides that, you know, that our immunity has to do with the way that we treat our bodies and treat our minds and our mindset, and eating well, and immunity has to do with that, and which is to be factored in. I have a lot of skepticism about, you know, the depth of that vigor, that intellectual vigor there, but also I also believe that science has always been wrong, and that's the whole point. It evolves. That's so science proves itself wrong again and
right
again. And I love science, and I think that's, you know,
right. Well, you probably love it because it's open to iteration.
100%.
Right. Any belief system that is not open to iteration.
Yeah. Anything trying to disprove itself, I'm kind of down for.
With. Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm trying to do.
Right.
Like everything I've just said, just throw it out the window. It may be wrong, but we're trying to figure life out. We're wrestling with it.
That's dope.
That's
I'm trying
the approach, man.
trying to prove myself wrong.
Yeah,
that's good. I like that a lot.
Unless I'm onto something that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to prove myself wrong that it's awesome to go and, you know, get a back rub once a week.
I think that it makes no. I'm very dogmatic. I'm very dogmatic in my Thai massages every week.
That's right.
Her name is Linda, and she walks on my back.
She's the
Even
best.
if I found out that it took 10 years off my life, I would still do it.
Still do it. Nothing like a Thai massage. You know what I want to be when I grow up? Massage critic. I wanted to invent a category. That's all I ever wanted.
That's so good.
Yeah, then Yelp came around and just ruined everything.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah. You know, it'd be fun to be a star on Yelp, where you're like a star reviewer.
Dude, why don't they?
Right?
I don't think so, but they should have that. I mean, they have, you know, it's like a YouTube star who is testing products, and a lot of people make careers out of being trusted sources. There's food critics, but why don't they just have the
massage critic?
Well, it's crazy how quickly you can make a career off of just being a source of truth. Like if you look at Tim Ferriss, for example, it's like most of the work that he's doing isn't original. And I don't say that because he's not an original guy, but he's kind of a conduit for other people. And his whole power is sifting through and finding what is true and bringing things that are useful into the world. Like, you know, if you listen to one of his podcasts, it's going to be filled with useful stuff. And I think that there's something, it's kind of just, it's amazing that like that work of like being a fact checker and then condensing information into something that's palatable, you can make a career off of very quickly. You don't actually need to be producing your own stuff all the time. Yeah. And, you know, Tim Ferriss is that amazing conduit for information. That is Tim Ferriss. He's been that all along, 4-Hour Work Week on, and you know, that is Tim Ferriss in essence. And what I would say, and you know, getting back to this idea of learn who you are and become it, when you do learn who you are, and when you really can know that, like for me, I'm the guy who's like entertaining and inclusive. And that applies to film, that applies to breathwork, that applies to, you know, and also absorbed in the mystery of like, what are we doing here? What is this fucking wild life that we're living? And then if I become that, the work of me is becoming that in everything I do. And what happens is you become unimaginably powerful, I think. This is my theory. But Lady Gaga is Lady Gaga is Lady Gaga. Everywhere she goes, in every situation, she is authentically that. Whatever that is, and she shows you who she is, and because of that, she becomes incredibly powerful. Now, the controversial thing I would say is, I think also Donald Trump is Donald Trump is Donald Trump, or you know,
unfortunately, Michael Jackson is Michael Jackson. He told you who he was all along, you know.
Right.
I'm bad.
I'm bad.
You know it, right?
Such a good one.
But really, that if you look at what consolidates power, for good or for bad, just energy. What consolidates energy is being like oneself, like authentically. Unfortunately, I think some people can be festering wounds at times.
Right. Well, maybe they don't necessarily have they haven't done the work on ethics to decide what kind of energy they want to put into the world. They just decide that they want to put energy into the world, and it can be very seductive to put dark energy into the world.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
So let's go back into the woo land.
Yeah,
the crazy.
Yeah. Let's get in there.
Yeah. We need a better word
for
that. Spiritual world.
Here's a great definition of spirituality, because this was something that always troubled me. Dealing with matters of ultimate concern.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, because people would always say, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious.
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean? It's
I need some better flashcards for the definitions of spirituality.
Yeah.
So dealing with matters of ultimate concern.
Yeah.
I love that.
Speaks to me.
I fucking love that. I'm going to start talking about, because it delegitimizes it when you, like with the other more popular words that we use, and it kind of, and you almost say it sheepishly, which is like, hey, we've all been there before. Most people who are have a modicum of curiosity in their lives, and have experienced how small they feel at the feet of nature, or have fallen in love or fallen out of love, or like that this is just one frequency that we're on, and there are so many others, and the information that we have here is so incomplete.
Yeah.
So I love dealing with matters of ultimate concern. And I do think that like that morning routine, like that, we like at Mudwater, right? We talk a lot about like the morning ritual, the evening ritual. I do think that those times of day of like rising and resting are moments when you're remembering. They can be moments when you're remembering to deal with the matters of ultimate concern.
Yeah. This idea of ritual as the acts which we do that are known to get us ready for a world of unknowns. So to set in motion a series of practices, but be it the ritual of marriage, the ritual of marriage is a ritual that happens before the great unknown of actually being married, right?
Right.
But we ritualize this thing, and I think that's super powerful. We're preparing ourselves for the world of unknowns by defining, by creating some definitions and some intentionality. And behind the day is our morning ritual. So like you're creating some intentionality behind the day. There's a bit of dropping in, perhaps. Like I love meditation, certainly a part of mine. Breathwork's a part of mine. I know those are part of yours as well. And the idea of kind of dropping into the soup and saying like, okay, who am I today? All things are possible. I intend a few things. I'm going to draw in some specific energy that I believe to be Chris's energy for today, which is like, I'm going to treat people well. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to be generous. I'm going to get some shit done that I'm excited about. And then launch yourself into the day of unknowns with that, samurai sword polished, the Kyle sword.
Right. So we're talking about consolidating power, and how when you are when Chris is Chris, he becomes infinitely powerful. And yes, he becomes Tony Robbins.
Yeah.
As
breathe, people.
Yeah.
Yes.
Coming 2022. Tony Robbins as
Godzilla.
Yeah.
He'd make a good Godzilla.
Tony Robbins would make a great Godzilla.
Yeah.
So we use these phrases like tap in. We use calling in, which sort of
we're getting woo
speaks
now.
speaks to being portals of energy that can make us crazy powerful, send us on trajectories. And you are telling me that sometimes you'll have these moments where you're leading a breathwork class.
Yeah.
And something will happen to you.
Yeah. So this thing is so cool because I think it translates to different things. It doesn't matter what you do. I think there's the similar version of this that shows up. But in breathwork, the experience, the way it goes is I guide people by talking them through it. Like, it's a challenging process, and so the first few minutes are difficult. So I'll just say things that kind of help people through, and I tend to just kind of try and shut down the thinking mind and a little bit just let things come through. You call that like channeling, or tapping into the main vein, or the mycelial network of whatever the communication is going on, and you're just got an antenna picking it up. That might sound crazy, but we all do it all the time. Like, where do your thoughts come from? Who knows? Like, they just show up. So you're just kind of letting those things come and letting them out. I'm letting them out my mouth.
Right.
And at some point, these specific things come up to be said that inevitably come with a little bit of resistance and a little bit of fear around them because they're maybe a little weird. Like, I'll say something like, and then you're thinking of your granddad in a canoe, just slowly like rowing by, and I'm like, where the hell did that come from? Should I say that? That's weird. I got 100 people here. They're in different experiences. Should I talk about a man in his canoe? And I'll say it. I've challenged myself to, whenever that weird thing comes, say it. Because inevitably what happens is, after the experience, people come up and they want to share of their experience because they're so profound. And someone will say, I was thinking of my granddad who used to canoe, down the Delaware River and used to, bring me cherries and whatever. And it's the thing that I was scared to say, or that I had a notable reaction to, that's like, this is not mine. I don't know what this is, but man with canoe just came in. And again, getting a little at risk of being a little woo here.
Wait, no, what was that? What's our new definition? I want to start training us to use this. At risk of
dealing with matters of ultimate concern, I would say that I think the ultimate concern here, it deals with a collective, a species that has great collective intelligence. We're human beings. We are the best at creating community that has ever happened on Earth. Like, we are an incredible species of communality. And as evidenced by our civilizations and the way that we desperately crave to be part of groups and things like that. And so as such, we have like a really strong collective intelligence and awareness of what's going on collectively. Like, honestly, that mycelial network, that like we are connected. Mm-hmm. And so we have a collective subconscious. We have a collective understanding of what's going on here in the world. And it is really, when you are of service, when you are saying something that is, that's not mine. The guy with the canoe is not for me to hear. It's for me to say, because another node on the network needs to hear it. And whatever that collective soup is, for whatever reason, I'm saying that thing, that person's picking it up. But the human organism, there's some available intelligence there where these things get shared. And to be a part of it, to be a contributing, voice to that collective voice, feels really good. And that's when we feel like we're in flow. That's when we're painting the thing that's like, I don't know where it came from, the genius of the song coming through, or even just like a freaking sick spreadsheet that you made. Right. It's just like, I don't know where that came from, but that thing is sick.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the trigger that you're tapping into, whether it's the like, am I going to give this guy's big gulp back to him? Because there's a little resistance here.
Yeah.
But I'm going to do it right now. Yeah. And it's different than belligerent difficulty, right? I think that there are people who don't have that dial finely tuned, and they're just kind of, I'm gonna do whatever, I have no fear, and that's not it. Yeah. But it's also not living timidly. Like, it's like finely tuning your radio dial so that you can give the big gulp back, and there's a conflict, but there's also love in it. Yeah. Or it's when the idea comes through you and you're like, ooh, this is a little uncomfortable to say right now, but I'm going to say it because that's the frequency that it's on. I do think that it's a muscle that you can grow and you can start to get better at it. And the more you do, the more you stop the less inward you become. Kind of by definition, you're opening up and you're getting these thoughts that are coming in somewhere else. And I think that that's how you see people who are on these crazy trajectories, because they're more often open to that portal. And you could take this way back down to the way that Andrew Huberman talks about learning. This is probably the most important thing that I've learned from Dr. Andrew Huberman, is that when you feel that moment of agitation or frustration, neurologically, that's actually the gateway to growth, because you're feeling this little bit of acetylcholine that is dumping in your brain, which allows for neuroplasticity. So if we were to reframe our relationship with agitation as positive and a gateway to growth, I think that we would see a much different world.
Man, that's it. And then to ask questions that put you in that place of how can I serve here? How can I be helpful? What are the, to ask good questions truly that involve the collective. Like, what would be useful? I think on social media sometimes that's a good question to ask. Is this helpful? Like, what you're posting, and who is it helpful to? It's like, is this delightful? I mean, that's fine. It doesn't have to always be helpful. Is this funny? Like, is this like, potentially alienating, isolating? Is this aspirational? You put a picture of your hot muscled Kyle, 8-pack on Instagram. Who's that helping? Who's that? Nobody wants to see that. But yes, some people do, because it's aspirational. And some people are going to feel less than when they see that. And you're not ultimately in control of that.
Right.
But what you are in control is of your intentionality in doing it. And you feel clear on that. You feel like feel good about it. Does it feel good in your body to post it? If not, don't do it. If it does, do it.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a huge power in making fun of yourself. That's, to me, I think that like when you decide to take that chance and you fall flat on your face, because if you feel the moment of fear and agitation, and then what you say comes stumbling out, which it often will, right? You're not always hit with the summer lightning strike of divinity and verbal fluidity when you have that little moment of agitation. Sometimes you're like, that didn't work out well. Like, oops. But
Totally.
But you do get closer. Like, if you can have a sense of humor about about kind of punching through that stratosphere again and again, your dial does become more finely tuned, and you start to use words on yourself like, I'm the kind of person that punches through a difficult situation, or will say the potentially awkward thing because it feels true. And you'll start to do it more and more, and you'll become more, I think that your batting average begins to improve over time.
I just saw this movie, Shang-Chi. It's so good. It's the new Marvel movie. And there's a line in the movie, if you aim at nothing, you'll hit nothing. It's just an archer, and she's aiming at the target. And to think about, if we do start to aim at something, whatever that may be, you just say, like, you're gonna fuck up, you're gonna hit like so many, you're gonna miss so many times. But if you're aiming at something, and that's not like, that could be pretty simple. That could be like, I want to be of service. I want to be somebody who's helping the world, or I want to be an entertainer, or I want to be, whatever it is. You'll start to hit it. Right. Like, and life takes time and patience, and our culture does not teach that. Our culture teaches us, if you're not famous by the time you're 25, you're, expiring. And I believe in the arc of a good life as one of, like, it's just an uphill slant that just goes up, and then you just firework at 95 years old, It's like, just keeps getting better because it keeps getting deeper in the experience of living. That's a good arc. That's an arc worth shooting for. That's aspirational to me. Given I'm 42, I'm over the hill. I'm a spring chicken, man. Got a lot ahead of us. I had a thought when you're, I had lots of thoughts. This one passed me by. What else you got?
That one passed you by. I think that we end on that flub. Actually,
That's fine.
We've been dancing seamlessly this whole time, and I think that ending on your flub is
Perfectly.
perfect.
Yeah.
Chris Keener, this was such a blast. Where can people get in touch with you?
Kile Tierman. You can get a hold of me on Instagram at the Chris Keener. That's a good place to do it. And I post a lot of breathwork stuff on there, so you can do a breathwork experience. Also, I have an app that's called the Lixir app, Lixir app. You can download that, and you can do breathwork at home anytime. It's free. Check it out. Try it out. Enjoy it. Leave us a review if you're motivated to. I'd love to hear how that is for you. And lastly, at drinkmudwater.com.
I think it's just mudwtr.com.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not the website guy.
Yeah, you're
I'm
not the
film
website
guy.
Yeah, but most of the film that you do see coming out of Mudwater is from the mind of this guy.
We have some amazing films coming down the pipe. Sonny Savage, a wild food forager. Koa Smith, an incredible surfer who helped heal a brain injury with the use of psychedelics. We have going to Puerto Rico next week with a guy named William Padilla Brown, who's an incredible mycologist who's going to discover new species of cordyceps with his DNA kit. So this is the kind of stuff we're talking about at Mudwater, and really jazzed to have people along for the ride.
Chris Keener, such a blast.
Yes.
Hey, it's Kyle again. Head over to trendswithbenefits.com and sign up for our newsletter to get weekly stories about psychedelics, adventure, well-being, and more. And if you dig this podcast, please leave a rating on Apple Podcasts. It takes less than 60 seconds and helps us book hard-to-get guests.